The conflict between Cenk Uygur and Jimmy Dore, the conflict between the Young Turks and the numerous left-wing YouTube channels that are circling like vultures, hoping to take a piece of the market share, a piece of the audience's time and attention to serve the same function of news aggregator, political commentary, and analysis. It brings us back to really fundamental questions about what a news aggregator is and what the function of these YouTube channels may be in our lives, shaping and reshaping the way we think about politics. It reminds me, in one peculiar sense, of the competition between Sega and Nintendo. In my youth, on the schoolyard, children were fanatically certain that their parents had made the right choice in either choosing Sega or Nintendo. They were certain that the video games they owned and they played were superior to the competition without ever really having the experience of seeing, trying, playing, living with the competition. We didn't know what we were missing out on the other side, but we were so convinced of the positive value of what we had that we knew, we felt that we knew that the alternative was not worth our time. Now, if you actually pay to subscribe to the Young Turks, if you pay to support the Young Turks, you're paying about as much money as you would to subscribe to the New York Times. But what is it you're paying for, right? If you pay for the New York Times, hypothetically, you're paying for someone to actually get on an airplane and fly to Libya, paying for someone to get on an airplane and fly to Syria or Venezuela or whatever it is, do some research, report back to you on political conditions as they unfold. If you are paying to support Cenk Uygur, if you are paying to support the Young Turks, you are instead, consciously or unconsciously, paying someone else to read the New York Times on your behalf. You're paying them to read and sift through the available stories and just select those few stories, no matter how small or obscure, no matter how trivial, that will reinforce your ideological biases, interests, or tendencies. The stories that you will find salacious or provocative or entertaining, yes, but ultimately the stories that you will find ideologically convenient. And you never, ever get a sense or feeling for what it is you're missing on the other side.
Sanders opened up a political space for the left. And opening that political space, all of this energy that went back for decades, 20, 30, 40 years, all of a sudden gets activated all at once. Millions of people. We want Medicare for all. We want expansion of Social Security. We want $15 an hour. The fight was over whether or not you accepted Medicare for all, whether or not you believed in $15 an hour, etc., etc., etc. Do you agree with Sanders or not became the basic fight. Sanders loses. Where does all of that energy go? That energy goes into the left, basically eating itself. You get characters like Jimmy Dore, Sam Cedar, that basically have their squabble and their fight, and then there's this kind of weird fault line and break in regards to whether or not the person finds themselves with Cedar and his smugness, or Jimmy and his remorseless anger. And you have these basically identities and personalities setting the context for the left. None of this has to do with policy. None of it has to do with policy. And at this point, I am somewhat derisive of all of it. All of it has everything to do with identity politics and wokeness that they don't like to call wokeness, but that's basically what it is for this subset of the left. Whether it's the TYT crowd, the Jimmy Dore crowd, or the Sam Cedar crowd.
If you check the front page of the Young Turks today, one of their lead news stories is that a politician used the N-word. A politician in Tarrant, Alabama. Local city council in Tarrant, Alabama, population 6,000, happened to have a camera running when one of their elected officials used the N-word. And that's news on the Young Turks. Do you think you'd hear about that if you subscribe to the New York Times? Do you think that would even make the state capital paper in Alabama? Do you see what's going on here? Now, I did an interesting sort of test to put this into comparative context. I scrolled through every single video the Young Turks has uploaded in the last month and searched for the words China and Chinese. We managed to go for more than a month without a single video, and they upload many videos per day on many different news stories. It's a huge number of videos without a single video talking about China or Chinese politics. One person used the N-word, and it's captured on some kind of footage in Tarrant, Alabama. And that's news. There's a sense in which we're failing to question the function of the so-called news aggregator. Now, if I take a look at Jimmy Dore, what do I see on his front page? It's one story after another condemning Joe Biden in plain language for being a hawk. Joe Biden for supposedly increasing the number of wars in the world, for dropping bombs in various countries, right? It's giving the most unflattering picture of Joe Biden's foreign policy imaginable. Now, let me ask you, if you watched every single video uploaded by Jimmy Dore in the last year, do you think you would have any idea what Joe Biden's foreign policy is? It's possible to give a critique of what Joe Biden is doing wrong that does, at the same time, in an analytical and useful way, explain to you what he's doing right or what his objectives are, what he's trying to do right, even if he's failing. You will never get that from Jimmy Dore, and it's not surprising, given that Jimmy Dore learned the tricks of the trade from the Young Turks, that the exact same thing is true of TYT. You will never figure out, for example, what Joe Biden's policy on China is, what his political situation in relation to India is. And let's really get deep and talk about Pakistan, a country somewhere in between that's of some crucial importance, also to places like Afghanistan. I could go on. You're paying for a kind of analysis that is at all times burying what are really the most important questions, failing to answer, failing to even recognize the most important questions of our time, while fumbling around for that needle in a haystack that can get them a hit video, such as some member of local city council in a town in Alabama you've never heard of using the N-word, such as some D-list celebrity saying something about Donald Trump or vaccines, something they can pounce on, something they can cross-examine, something they can criticize. 2 years ago, can you remember this? There was this period of intense criticism of the alt-right, where everyone on the left and everyone in the center took a long, hard look at the distorting effects that social media had on right-wing politics. And they said, not us. That is never going to happen to me. I'm never going to sign up for one of these small, narrow ideological silos where I'm just fed little pieces of disjointed information that reinforce my biases, that make me feel more and more confident of my own agenda without calling into question any of my assumptions. It happened. It's happening right now. And if you really look at the breakdown of the left wing on YouTube, if you look at the Young Turks versus Jimmy Dore, you look at the extent to which people are willingly and eagerly signing up to get the very specific left-wing message from Jimmy Dore, the message that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not left-wing enough, the message that Joe Biden is a warmonger at the time when he is removing the last 2,500 troops from Iraq, when he is giving up on and abandoning Afghanistan, at a time when Joe Biden has just pretty much said to the Saudi Arabians, we're not in a military alliance with you anymore, you have to fight your own wars. When Joe Biden has actually done a whole bunch of decisive things to fundamentally change the map of the world, the situation for war and peace in the future, including, China, India, things the Young Turks will never mention. Right, in this context, what people are signing up and paying the Young Turks for, what people are signing up and donating money to Jimmy Dore for, is precisely to get a message much more narrow than what the New York Times has to offer you. And I do not hold this up as a standard of excellence. Not at all. During the year 2020, when there were cities across the United States of America with race riots, when there were cities being burned to the ground, when there were shopping malls being looted in the name of defunding the police, so on and so forth, most of the time, the New York Times was reporting that the police were bad and evil and wrong. But once in a while, just once in a while, you heard them admit that the person being arrested was a drug addict, that the person being arrested was violent, that the police officer was doing the best they could to interrupt a stabbing or a shooting. Once in a while, we heard from the New York Times that actually the left-wing propaganda message made absolutely no sense. And that is what is missing from the Young Turks, and that is what is missing from Jimmy Dore. And instead, what do you get? You get a very powerful kind of propaganda, precisely because you are never made aware of what it is that you're missing out on.
Well, this right here, this is the Sega Master System. I have a lot of love for the Sega Master System. I actually played one of these before I played an NES. Big colors, bright colors, great sound, but it didn't quite have the marketing power that the NES had. So a lot of people in America grew up playing the NES instead of the Sega Master System.
Now I recognize it's completely counterproductive to criticize an action movie for not being funny. It's counterproductive to criticize a comedy for feeling to make you feel scared the way a horror movie is supposed to. There's a question of what genre these people are addressing their edutainment news service to. And I think many people in the audience would have pricked up their ears before when I mentioned the total lack of coverage of the politics of China and said, hey, you can't criticize the Young Turks for that. You can't criticize Jimmy Dore for that, because that's just not what they do. But that leads us back to a much more profound question of what it is positively that they are supposed to do. The Central Park 5 incident, that is not a minor or trivial incident in the history of the United States of America, and it's not a minor or trivial incident in the history of the Young Turks or Jimmy Dore as YouTube channels. Why is it that they never made YouTube videos retracting or apologizing for the things they said on that front that were factually wrong? And I don't mean slightly factually wrong. I don't mean minor embarrassments. I don't mean a typo here and there. I mean there was a woman who was raped and who got up from her hospital bed and who said, this is offensive to me because she knows she wasn't raped by one man. She knows it was a gang rape. She knows the physical evidence. She knows the contents of the police report. She knows the extent to which the left wing lied about her experience and what happened to her to create a kind of politically convenient myth to pursue their own agenda. The Central Park 5 incident, it's not a victimless crime. And the extent to which the Young Turks and the whole left wing were willing to just jump on with fabricating evidence and disregarding counter evidence and then never examining it, never apologizing for that fact. If you feel that it's unreasonable to point to the New York Times or any other standard what a normal news service is and say, hey, why are there these huge gaps in what you cover? What about all this stuff you don't cover on your so-called news show? If we limit our critique just to what it is that they do cover in this very peculiar fear-mongering role, why is it that they made this potent propaganda message out of the alleged experience of Althea Bernstein? And by the way, if you watch what the Young Turks said about it, if you watch what Jimmy Dore said about it, they had misgivings. They weren't 100% certain. Oh, well, I don't know. This is breaking news coming in. And they never went back and retracted it. They never did the research. They never apologized. Within the small remit of what they define as their genre, within this peculiar function they serve of providing their audience with little nuggets of information, no matter how obscure, to reinforce their political agenda. Still, isn't there a question to ask about the extent to which now, in 2021, in the pursuit of money and fame, the alt-left is simply reinventing the familiar evils of the alt-right from just 2 years ago?